I won the lottery. $3.5 billion. After a lifetime of playing it safe and counting every decision, the world finally tipped my way. And suddenly, my wife changed. Concern replaced affection. Long hugs, careful smiles, paperwork dressed as help. She said she was worried. Said money like this could break me. Said I needed protection. But what she really meant was control. What she didn't know was I'd been underestimated my whole life, and I'd learned how to listen. And the first thing I heard made my blood run cold. Before I tell you how that whisper turned into documents, closed doors, and a plan I wasn't meant to see, do me a favor, hit subscribe and drop a comment about where you're watching from. Stories like this only move when you help them travel. I'm Adrian. I'm 33. Until this happened, my life was small in the best way. Predictable mornings, steady work, dinners that didn't need photos to feel complete. I was raised to keep my head down and my promises kept. My dad used to say money doesn't change who you are, it just gives people permission to show you who they've been. I didn't understand that until the envelope arrived. I hadn't planned to buy a ticket. It was late, raining, and I stopped at Ridgeway Fuel Mart because my wipers were streaking. The lottery display flickered behind the counter. I asked for one ticket, more out of boredom than hope. I folded it into my wallet and forgot about it by the time I buckled my seatbelt. 3 days later, a heavy envelope slid through the mail slot. No return address. Thick paper. My name printed clean and formal, like it belonged to someone else. I opened it standing at the kitchen counter, expecting a bank notice. Instead, the words rearranged my understanding of the world. Congratulations. Midland State Lottery Commission. $3.5 billion. Instructions enclosed. I didn't react the way movies say you should. No shouting. No jumping. I sat down slowly, like my knees had decided for me, and stared at the wall while my heart hammered. The apartment hummed with normal sounds, the fridge, the clock, the distant traffic, and I remember thinking that if I moved too fast, this would vanish. Like a deer holding still in headlights. Melissa wasn't home yet. That detail mattered more than I knew. I folded the letter back into the envelope and locked it in the drawer with our passports and appliance manuals. I made pasta. Burned the garlic. Ate half and pushed the rest around the plate. When Melissa came in, she kissed my cheek, complained about traffic, and told me about a meeting that could have been an email. I listened like I always did. I didn't tell her. Not that night. I needed a minute to understand what had happened before I let it become real out loud. Sleep didn't come easy. My mind kept replaying the words, testing them, waiting for the punchline. In the morning, I checked the drawer again, half expecting it to be empty. It wasn't. The calls started before lunch. Unknown numbers. Calm voices. Verification questions. I took notes I didn't understand yet. In the afternoon, a man in a navy polo knocked, congratulated me, handed me a sealed folder, and left like this was routine. Inside was a gift bag, a tiny bottle of champagne, and more paperwork than I could process. That night, I told Melissa. She laughed at first, one sharp sound that didn't quite land. Then she read the papers again. Then she stopped laughing. Her questions changed. Not, are you okay, but who else knows? Not, how do you feel, but we should be careful. She said it gently, like a blanket being tucked around my shoulders. I think this is a lot for you, she said. Anyone would feel overwhelmed. Maybe you should talk to someone. Just to process. It sounded reasonable. Loving, even. Within days, she was sitting in on calls. Finishing my sentences. Correcting details when I paused to think. She told me I looked tired. That stress could do strange things. She suggested I take time off work. She booked an appointment at Northbridge Behavioral Center, just to talk. I went. The psychiatrist asked soft questions. How was I sleeping? Did I feel anxious? Did things feel unreal? I answered honestly. Of course they did. I'd woken up a normal guy and gone to bed someone the world suddenly wanted a piece of. Anyone would feel unsteady. When we left, Melissa squeezed my hand a little too tight. See, she said. It's good to have professionals involved. That was the first shift under my feet. Subtle. Like a floorboard bending. The second came late one night when I heard her whispering in the bedroom with the door closed. I didn't mean to listen. I just heard my name. Heard, not acting like himself, and, we need to be proactive. The words floated down the hall and landed somewhere cold in my chest. Careful. Proactive. Protection. By the end of the second week, documents started appearing on the kitchen table. Trust options. Asset management plans. Pages already highlighted. My name typed into places I hadn't agreed to yet. Melissa explained them slowly, patiently, the way you explain a phone to someone who's never used one. I didn't sign anything. That seemed to bother her. She started saying I'd forgotten conversations. That I'd agreed to things I knew I hadn't. When I pushed back, she looked hurt, then worried. Said she felt like she was losing me. I started writing things down, dates, times, exact phrases. It felt paranoid, and that scared me, because I'd never been that guy. But something in me had woken up and it wasn't going back to sleep. The moment everything clicked came when I found a draft email on our shared tablet. I shouldn't have opened it. But I did. Addressed to an attorney I didn't know. Subject line, capacity evaluation. I closed the app and sat in the dark, listening to Melissa breathe beside me, understanding something terrifying and simple at the same time. I hadn't just won money. I'd become a liability. And whatever she was planning, it didn't require my agreement, only my silence. That's when I decided to stop reacting and start preparing. Because if she thought I was too overwhelmed to notice the net tightening around me, she was about to learn what quiet people do when they finally see the trap. The next morning, I woke up with the strange clarity that comes after a bad realization finally settles into truth. Nothing felt rushed anymore. Fear had burned itself out overnight and left something sharper behind. Focus. Melissa was already awake, moving around the kitchen with deliberate calm. She smiled when she saw me, poured coffee, asked how I slept. Normal questions. Normal tone. It was almost impressive how easily she slid back into routine, like the night before hadn't cracked something wide open. I played my part. I nodded. I smiled back. I thanked her for scheduling another call with an advisor later that day. I let her believe the concern had worked, that I was grateful, pliable, relieved to be guided. Inside, I was counting. I started noticing patterns. Which calls she insisted on joining. Which documents she pushed hardest. Which phrases she repeated, for your own good, temporary, just until things stabilize. I'd heard those words before in other people's stories. I just never thought I'd hear them in my own kitchen. By the end of the week, she introduced me to someone new. Ryan. Her brother. He showed up with takeout and an easy smile, acting like he'd just dropped by to check in. We hadn't been close. Before. Polite holidays, nothing more. Now he lingered. Asked questions that sounded casual but weren't. How stressed did I feel? Was I sleeping? Did I ever feel like things were slipping? Melissa watched my answers closely. That night, after Ryan left, she said, it helps to have family involved. You don't want to isolate yourself right now. Isolate. Another word added to the list. I made my first call the next morning, to Evan Marshall. A lawyer a coworker had once mentioned in passing after a messy divorce. I didn't tell Melissa. I framed it as a bank call and stepped outside to take it. Evan didn't interrupt while I talked. When I finished, there was a long pause on the line. You're doing the right thing by calling early, he said. And you need to keep this quiet. Those words steadied me more than anything else had. We met 2 days later at Marshall & Knox Legal. Evan didn't react when I told him the number. He didn't smile or congratulate me. He asked about timelines, behaviors, documentation. When I mentioned the psychiatrist, the draft email, the trust paperwork, his expression hardened. This isn't concern, he said. This is positioning. That word landed hard. He advised me to separate finances immediately, freeze shared access, and document everything. He also suggested a private investigator, not to spy, but to understand who was talking to whom. Information, he said, is leverage. I went home and acted overwhelmed. Melissa leaned into it immediately. She took over emails. Suggested she handle scheduling. Told me she'd spoken to Dr. Howard Klein, a psychiatrist she trusted, about next steps. When I asked what next steps meant, she smiled gently and said, nothing serious. Just evaluations. Structure. Structure. Another word. 2 days later, a courier delivered a packet while I was home alone. Northbridge Behavioral Center letterhead. Appointment confirmations. Consent forms, pre-filled. My signature typed neatly at the bottom. I didn't sign. I scanned every page and sent them to Evan. That evening, Melissa noticed the packet still on the counter. She asked if I'd forgotten to sign. I told her I wanted to read them more carefully first. Her jaw tightened for half a second before the smile returned. I just don't want you to spiral, she said. Spiral. That night, I downloaded a screen recorder. I backed up my phone. I set my laptop to automatically archive emails. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning survival. The investigator, Caleb Moore, worked quietly. Within a week, he confirmed what I'd suspected. Melissa had been meeting with an attorney I'd never met. Ryan had been present at 2 meetings. There were emails discussing timing, capacity, and minimizing resistance. Nothing explicit. Nothing illegal. Just enough to sketch the outline of a cage. Then came the appointment notice for a court-appointed evaluation. That was new. It arrived by certified mail. Official. Polite. Terrifying. A request for me to appear for a mental capacity assessment, initiated by a concerned spouse. I read it 3 times before the words stopped swimming. Melissa watched me read it. "There," she said softly. "This will help. After this, everything calms down." I nodded. Inside, something went very still. Evan moved fast. He filed motions. He requested delays. He documented inconsistencies. He advised me to request my own independent evaluation immediately. Voluntarily. Proactively. So I did. Dr. Samuel Whitman was thorough, skeptical, and refreshingly blunt. He asked me questions Melissa never had, about decision-making, stress responses, long-term planning. He didn't look for cracks. He looked for coherence. When we finished, he said, "You're under pressure. That's not pathology. That's context." I walked out of that office feeling taller. Melissa didn't like that. She accused me of hiding things. Of being secretive. Of letting strangers influence me. Ryan started calling more often, dropping by unannounced. Paula, one of Melissa's friends, suddenly wanted to check in. Every conversation nudged the same direction. Doubt. Concern. Control. I kept smiling. I kept agreeing to talk. I kept recording. The day the court notice arrived, scheduling a preliminary hearing, Melissa cried. Real tears. She said she was scared for me. For us. That she was only trying to help. I believed her once. Now I watched. Evan laid out the plan. We wouldn't attack. We'd expose. Calmly. Methodically. We'd let them build their case and then show the gaps. The assumptions. The manipulation dressed up as care. The night before the hearing, Melissa slept soundly. I didn't. I sat at the table with my notes spread out, listening to the refrigerator hum, thinking about how fast love can turn into paperwork when money enters the room. I thought about how easily people confuse silence for weakness. They were about to learn the difference. Because when the doors opened the next morning and my name was called, I wasn't walking in confused, overwhelmed, or broken. I was walking in prepared. And that was the one thing they hadn't planned for. The courthouse smelled like disinfectant and old paper, the kind of place where decisions are made quietly and lives are rearranged without ceremony. I arrived early, alone. Melissa came later with Ryan, both of them dressed in soft colors, the visual language of concern. She squeezed my arm when she saw me, whispered that everything would be okay. I nodded, thanked her for being there, and took my seat. The hearing was brief by design. Preliminary. Procedural. A judge with tired eyes asked measured questions, listened to attorneys frame the issue as caution rather than conflict. Melissa's lawyer spoke about stress, sudden wealth, the strain it puts on relationships. He never used the word insane. He didn't have to. The implication did the work for him. Evan spoke next. Calm. Precise. He didn't accuse. He clarified. Timelines. Documentation. Voluntary evaluations already completed. He requested that any further assessments be postponed until evidence warranted them. The judge nodded. Set a date. Asked everyone to cooperate. Outside, Melissa hugged me tightly. Too tightly. See, she said. We're getting through this. I smiled and said nothing. That afternoon, the tone shifted. Ryan called, his voice clipped now. Less warmth. More urgency. He asked why I'd hired my own lawyer without telling them. I told him I wanted to understand my options. He sighed, said he was disappointed. Said secrecy wasn't healthy. Secrecy. Melissa started staying up late, whispering on calls she took on the balcony. I didn't confront her. I let the recorder run. I let patterns reveal themselves. Caleb brought me a report 2 days later. Emails forwarded. Meetings logged. A hotel receipt tied to Lakeshore Grand where Melissa had met Dr. Howard Klein, outside normal office hours. Nothing illegal. Nothing clean either. Strategy meetings disguised as care. Evan reviewed it all and leaned back in his chair. They're escalating, he said. Next step is pressure. Pressure arrived in the form of concern from unexpected places. Paula stopped by with soup. Said Melissa was worried about me. Asked if I'd been sleeping. A colleague emailed to ask if everything was okay. He'd heard I was taking time to process. The narrative was spreading. I tightened my circle. Changed passwords. Moved assets into a temporary trust Evan controlled. Quiet moves. Legal moves. I told Melissa I needed space to think. She agreed, a little too quickly. The second court notice arrived a week later. A request, polite, urgent, for a comprehensive evaluation. Evan responded within the hour, attaching my independent assessment, requesting equal consideration. He also filed a motion to limit Melissa's access to my medical information. That's when she cracked. Not in public. In the kitchen. She slammed a drawer, accused me of shutting her out. Said I was letting fear turn me against her. I listened, said I needed clarity. She cried, said she felt alone. I recorded every word. 2 nights later, I overheard her telling Ryan that I was getting slippery. Slippery. Evan smiled when I told him. That's the sound of control slipping. The hearing reconvened in a smaller room. No gallery. Just attorneys, the judge, and us. Evan presented documentation showing consent forms pre-filled without my agreement, communications coordinating evaluations before any diagnosis, and recordings that captured language shifting from care to compliance. Melissa's attorney objected. The judge overruled. Then Dr. Whitman testified. Briefly. Clinically. He stated I was under stress consistent with sudden wealth and public scrutiny. He stated I demonstrated intact judgment and decision-making capacity. He stated there was no basis for compelled intervention. Silence followed. The judge asked Melissa if she had anything to add. She looked at me. Really looked. And for the first time since the envelope arrived, I saw uncertainty. She spoke about fear. About wanting to protect us. About how fast things had moved. The judge nodded again. Then he spoke. This court will not substitute caution for consent, he said. Any further actions require clear evidence of incapacity. That evidence is not present. The motion was denied. Outside, Melissa didn't hug me. She said we needed to talk later. She left with Ryan. I went back to Evan's office and sat in the quiet. Relief came in waves, followed by something heavier. Grief, maybe. Not for what I'd lost, but for what I'd finally seen. That night, I changed the locks. Melissa returned to find a note asking her to stay with her brother while we reassessed. She called. Texted. Apologized. Accused. I didn't respond. The next morning, Summit Ridge Bank confirmed the transfers. The trust was active. My accounts were insulated. Evan filed notice of separation of finances. Clean. Legal. Final. Melissa sent a message that afternoon, "You're destroying us." I typed back once, "I'm protecting myself." The days that followed were strangely quiet. No calls from advisors. No surprise visits. The narrative stalled without access. Evan warned me not to relax. "They'll try one more angle," he said. "They always do." It came from an unexpected place. A letter from Northbridge Behavioral Center addressed to me directly. An apology for confusion. A clarification that no further evaluations were scheduled without my consent. Enclosed was a copy of an email chain, sent by mistake, perhaps, discussing client expectations and risk exposure. I forwarded it to Evan. He forwarded it to Melissa's attorney. The next call I got was from her lawyer, asking to reset the temperature. We met in a conference room with bad coffee and better lighting. Melissa looked tired. Not strategic tired. Human tired. She said she wanted to move forward peacefully. That she'd acted out of fear. That the money scared her. I told her the truth. That the money hadn't changed me. That the attempt to manage me had. We discussed terms. Separation. Boundaries. A plan that didn't require me to be smaller for her comfort. Evan handled the language. I handled the silence. When it was over, Melissa reached for my hand and stopped herself. "I never thought you'd fight," she said. "I never thought I'd need to," I replied. She left with a box of personal things and a look that finally matched the situation. Weeks passed. The noise faded. I slept again. I ate without checking my phone. I started walking in the mornings, listening to the city wake up like it always had, indifferent to my problems. Caleb closed his file. Evan sent a final memo summarizing protections in place. The judge signed the last order. One evening, as the sun fell between buildings, I opened the drawer and took out the envelope where it had all started. The paper felt lighter now. Not because the number had changed, but because the fear had. I hadn't just defended my capacity. I'd reclaimed my agency. And whatever came next would be on my terms. The quiet after the legal storm felt unreal, like the pause after a loud machine finally shuts off and your ears keep ringing out of habit. I kept expecting something else to happen, a knock, a call, a sudden reversal, but days passed and nothing broke the surface. It was just me, the apartment, and a sense of space I hadn't felt in weeks. I started rebuilding my routines deliberately. Morning walks before emails. Breakfast without screens. Work calls taken at the desk instead of pacing the living room like a caged animal. Evan advised me to keep things boring for a while. Boring, he said, is a shield. I listened. Melissa stayed with Ryan. We didn't speak except through attorneys. When we did exchange messages for logistics, they were short and sterile, like notes passed between strangers who once shared a language and no longer trusted the grammar. It was strange how fast intimacy could turn procedural. The press never came. There was no public spectacle, no viral clip. The story didn't have teeth without access to me, and that was the point. Control evaporates when it can't get close enough to touch. Evan called it containment. I called it peace. Then the first payment hit my account. A transfer, clean and documented, tied to the separation agreement. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't restitution. It was acknowledgement, and it arrived without a message. I noted it, archived the confirmation, and moved on. Money had become quieter to me, less of a promise, more of a tool. Dangerous when mishandled, useful when respected. I moved out of the apartment a week later, not because I had to, but because I wanted a place that didn't echo with what-ifs. I chose a smaller house in Cedar Hollow Estates, nothing flashy, just light and air and a backyard big enough to remind me that space exists. The first night there, I slept with the windows open and woke up to birds instead of notifications. I began meeting with Thomas Reed, a financial advisor Evan trusted. Thomas didn't flatter. He didn't pitch. He asked questions that sounded simple and turned complicated fast. What did I want my days to look like? Who did I want to answer to? What would enough actually mean if I removed fear from the equation? We built structures that didn't depend on my attention every hour. Firewalls between assets and decisions. Timelines that favored patience. The money went to work quietly while my life stayed small on purpose. Caleb checked in once more, then closed the book. For what it's worth, he said, you handled this clean. I thanked him. Clean felt like the highest compliment. Melissa sent one final message through her attorney asking if I'd be open to a mediated conversation for closure. Evan asked what I wanted. I said no. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. Closure doesn't come from conversations when the truth has already been said. The weeks that followed brought an unexpected emotion, grief. Not for the marriage as it was, but for the version of myself who thought silence could keep the peace forever. I let myself feel it. Then I let it pass. I started volunteering 2 mornings a week at a community center near Stonehaven Ridge, teaching basic financial literacy to people who wanted to understand systems that had always felt opaque to them. It grounded me. It reminded me that knowledge shared is power diluted, safer in many hands than hoarded by a few. One afternoon, a woman stayed after class to ask how I learned to stay calm when everything feels like it's moving too fast. I thought about it for a moment and told her the truth. I stopped letting other people narrate my life. That night, I wrote it down. I began keeping a journal again, not evidence this time, just thoughts. Patterns. Small victories. Questions that didn't need answers yet. I noticed that my handwriting had changed. Less cramped. More space between words. Ryan reached out once, a brief email that said he hoped I was well. No subtext I could prove, no apology I could feel. I replied with a single sentence wishing him the same. That door didn't need to be reopened to be acknowledged. Melissa's social media went quiet. Then it reappeared, curated and careful. New routines. New circles. I muted it. Distance isn't avoidance when it's chosen. The trust finalized. The last legal document was signed. Evan shook my hand and said, "You did the hardest part yourself." I asked what that was. He said, "You believed your own memory." I stood in the backyard one evening as the sun went down and thought about how close I'd come to losing the right to make ordinary decisions, what to eat, where to go, who to trust. It still made my chest tighten if I stayed with it too long, so I didn't. Awareness without obsession. That was the balance. A letter arrived one Saturday morning from Northbridge Behavioral Center. A formal notice that their internal review had concluded and policies were being updated regarding consent and third-party requests. No apology. No admission. Just process correcting itself quietly. I filed it away and felt something settle. I began planning the next year not as an escape, but as an investment in calm. Travel without announcements. Projects without urgency. Time to learn what I liked when no one was steering. There were nights I missed having someone to tell everything to. There were mornings I didn't. Both were true, and neither needed fixing. By the time summer leaned toward fall, my life felt proportional again. Not smaller. Truer. I had space to think without being watched, money that didn't demand obedience, and a future that didn't require me to be managed. I knew one more decision was coming, the one about what to do next, not legally, but intentionally. I wasn't ready to make it yet, and for the first time, that felt like a feeling I could trust. Because when you reclaim your agency, you learn something unexpected. Urgency is often borrowed fear. And I was done borrowing. The decision didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces, like the way light moves across a room during the day, slow, almost unnoticeable, until you realize the shadows have shifted and you're standing somewhere new. For months after everything settled, I resisted the urge to do something dramatic. No grand gestures. No announcements. No interviews. The money stayed where it was supposed to stay. My days stayed quiet. That restraint wasn't fear anymore, it was discipline. I wanted whatever came next to be chosen, not reactive. I kept volunteering at the community center. I kept my routine small. I learned the difference between being alone and being at peace. That distinction mattered more than I expected. When you've spent weeks being watched, evaluated, measured by other people's standards, privacy feels like oxygen. Evan checked in less often. That was a good sign. Legal silence meant stability. He sent a final note confirming everything was locked in exactly as planned, then added a line at the end, "If you ever need anything, not as a client, but as a person, you know where to find me." I appreciated that more than the precision of his contracts. One evening, I opened the journal and reread the earliest entries. They were tight, clipped, written by someone bracing for impact. Later pages loosened. Questions replaced warnings. Ideas replaced defense. I could track the moment I stopped writing to protect myself and started writing to understand myself. That's when I realized what had been bothering me. All this time, people had been asking what I was going to do with the money. Invest. Buy. Expand. Build. No one had asked what I wanted to undo. I thought about my dad. About how carefully he'd lived. About how much of his life had been spent managing risk instead of choosing joy. About how he'd taught me to be steady, but not necessarily free. I didn't resent him for it. He did the best he could with what he had. But I didn't want to repeat the lesson exactly as it was taught. So I called Thomas and asked a different question. "What's the cleanest way to make this irreversible?" He didn't ask what I meant. He paused, then said, "We can structure it so you can't be pressured later. No access. No clawbacks. No leverage." "That's what I want," I said. We spent weeks designing something quiet and permanent. No branding. No naming rights. No press releases. A structure that didn't require my face or my story. Just outcomes. I chose education and legal advocacy, not because they sounded noble, but because I'd seen how quickly power can be taken when people don't understand the rules written around them. I funded programs that taught people how to read contracts, how to question authority politely and persistently, how to recognize when concern becomes control. I didn't tell many people. I didn't need to. The day the transfers finalized, I felt lighter in a way I hadn't expected. Not because I'd given something away, but because I'd removed a weapon from the table. Money stops being dangerous when it can't be used against you or anyone else. Melissa never reached out again. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved cities, started over, told a version of the story that centered on stress and misunderstanding. I didn't correct it. Truth doesn't need my endorsement to exist. Ryan sent a final email wishing me well. I replied kindly and briefly. There was no benefit in punishing people who no longer had influence over me. A year passed. My life didn't become extraordinary. It became mine. I traveled without itineraries. I read without highlighting. I learned how to cook things that required patience. I sat with discomfort long enough to hear what it was actually saying instead of rushing to silence it. One afternoon, while walking through a park near Stonehaven Ridge, I watched a kid teach his younger sister how to ride a bike. He ran alongside her, hand hovering just behind the seat, ready but not interfering. She wobbled. Corrected. Pedaled on her own. He let go without making a big deal about it. That image stayed with me. Support without control. Presence without ownership. Care that doesn't cage. That was the lesson I'd paid billions to learn. Sometimes, late at night, I think about how close I came to losing my voice without ever raising it. About how easy it is to mistake calm for consent. About how often people who speak softly are assumed to be harmless. I don't carry anger with me anymore. Anger is heavy, and I've already put enough down. What I carry instead is precision. Awareness. The knowledge that silence can be chosen, or imposed, and the difference matters. If you're listening to this and something in it feels familiar, take that seriously. Pay attention to who speaks for you when you're tired. To who benefits from your confusion. To how quickly help starts coming with signatures attached. And if this story stayed with you, do me one last favor, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment about where you're watching from. Stories like this reach the people who need them because someone decides to pass them along.